Sarah Martinez adjusted her sun hat and took another photo of the towering cruise ship. To everyone around her, she looked like any other excited tourist boarding the Mediterranean Explorer for a 7-day journey through the Greek islands. Her camera hung around her neck, and she clutched a colorful brochure filled with shore excursion options. The other passengers barely noticed the woman in her late 30s, with sun-kissed skin and surprisingly steady hands. She blended perfectly into the crowd of vacationers, families, and retirees, all eager to escape their daily routines. Sarah had mastered the art of appearing ordinary, something she had learned to do very well over the past 5 years. As she walked up the gangway, Sarah's trained eyes automatically scanned the ship's structure. She noted the emergency exits, the crew positions, and the general layout without appearing to study anything at all. Old habits died hard, especially when those habits had once meant the difference between life and death in some of the world's most dangerous airspace. Her cabin was small but comfortable, located on Deck 7 with a tiny porthole overlooking the endless blue water. Sarah unpacked her simple belongings: casual clothes, sunscreen, a few novels, and hidden at the bottom of her suitcase, a worn leather journal she never traveled without. The journal contained no tourist plans or shopping lists. Instead, its pages held technical diagrams, flight patterns, and emergency procedures that most people would never understand. Sarah had chosen this cruise carefully. After years of living quietly in a small coastal town, working as a flight instructor for weekend pilots, she needed to get away from everything that reminded her of who she used to be. The nightmares had been getting worse lately, and her therapist suggested that maybe it was time to face some of her fears rather than running from them. The first day at sea passed peacefully. Sarah joined other passengers for the safety drill, listening politely as crew members explained what to do if the ship's alarm sounded. She noticed several things during the demonstration that concerned her. Some crew members seemed inexperienced, others appeared distracted, and the emergency equipment wasn't positioned as efficiently as it could have been. But she kept these observations to herself. This was supposed to be a vacation, not a military inspection. That evening, Sarah dined alone at a small table near the window in the main restaurant. She ordered simple food and watched the sun set over the water, trying to quiet the constant awareness that buzzed in the back of her mind. At nearby tables, families laughed together, couples held hands, and groups of friends planned their adventures for the next port of call. An elderly man at the next table struck up a conversation. "First cruise?" he asked with a friendly smile. "Yes," Sarah replied, keeping her voice light and cheerful. "I've always wanted to see the Greek islands." "Oh, you'll love it," the man continued. "My wife and I have been on dozens of cruises. The islands are beautiful, and the ship's crew really takes care of you. Nothing to worry about at all." Sarah nodded and smiled, but she couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't quite right. Maybe it was the way some of the crew members moved with uncertainty, or how she'd noticed the ship's communications equipment looked older than it should be. Her military training had taught her to trust her instincts, but she reminded herself that she was no longer responsible for other people's safety. Later that night, Sarah stood on her small balcony listening to the sound of waves against the ship's hull. The Mediterranean stretched endlessly in all directions, dark and mysterious under the starlit sky. She thought about the letter she'd received 3 months ago, a job offer from a major airline looking for experienced pilots. The salary was excellent, and it would mean returning to the career she'd once loved more than anything. But Sarah had turned down the offer without a second thought. She'd already paid too high a price for her years in the cockpit, flying dangerous missions that she could never talk about with anyone. The scars on her left shoulder served as a daily reminder of the day everything had gone wrong, when her quick thinking had saved her entire squadron, but ended her military career forever. As she prepared for bed, Sarah made a promise to herself. For the next 6 days, she would be nothing more than a tourist. She would take photos, buy souvenirs, and try to remember what it felt like to be a normal person without the weight of command responsibility on her shoulders. The ship rocked gently as it moved through the calm waters toward their first destination. Sarah fell asleep to the rhythmic sound of the engines, unaware that within hours everything would change. The skills she'd tried so hard to leave behind would become the only thing standing between 320 innocent people and disaster. In her dreams, Sarah was flying again. The cockpit felt familiar beneath her hands, and the sky stretched endlessly ahead. But even in sleep, she couldn't escape the feeling that storm clouds were gathering on the horizon, and soon she would need to navigate through them once more. The woman who had once been known as Captain Sarah Storm Martinez was about to discover that some callings never truly leave you, no matter how far you run or how hard you try to hide. The morning of the second day began like any other cruise day. Sarah woke to gentle sunlight streaming through her porthole and the sound of families laughing in the corridor outside her cabin. She dressed in a simple blue sundress and made her way to the buffet deck for breakfast, still determined to play the role of relaxed tourist. The dining area buzzed with excitement as passengers discussed their planned shore excursion to Santorini. Sarah collected a modest breakfast and found a quiet spot near the rail, where she could watch the famous white and blue buildings of the island grow larger as they approached the harbor. "Beautiful morning, isn't it?" asked a voice behind her. Sarah turned to see Elena Kostopoulos, the ship's guest relations manager, a young Greek woman with worried eyes despite her professional smile. "It certainly is," Sarah replied, sensing something beneath Elena's cheerful demeanor. Elena hesitated, then sat down without being invited. "Are you enjoying your cruise so far?" "Very much," Sarah answered carefully, noting how Elena's hands trembled slightly as she arranged her paperwork. "That's wonderful to hear," Elena continued, but her voice carried a tension that made Sarah's instincts sharpen. "I hope you'll continue to have a pleasant experience with us." The conversation felt odd, loaded with meaning that Sarah couldn't quite grasp. Before she could ask any questions, Elena hurried away, leaving behind only the faint scent of nervous perspiration and a business card that had fallen from her stack of papers. Sarah picked up the card and noticed handwriting on the back, a series of numbers that looked like coordinates, and the word help written so faintly it was barely visible. Her pulse quickened, but she forced herself to remain calm. This could mean anything, or nothing at all. As the ship docked at Santorini, Sarah decided to skip the organized tour and explore on her own. She needed space to think and observe without the distraction of tour guides and chattering tourists. The island's narrow streets and stunning views provided the perfect cover for her real purpose, trying to understand what Elena might have been trying to tell her. From a cliffside cafe, Sarah used a pair of binoculars she'd purchased in the gift shop to study the ship from a distance. What she saw made her blood run cold. The Mediterranean explorer sat lower in the water than a ship of its size should. The loading procedures looked chaotic, with crew members rushing around in apparent confusion rather than following standard protocols. Most disturbing of all, she noticed that several lifeboats on the port side appeared to be incorrectly secured. From her vantage point, the safety equipment that should protect all 320 souls aboard looked woefully inadequate for the ship's actual capacity. Sarah's mind raced through possibilities. Was the ship overloaded? Were there structural problems? Had someone intentionally sabotaged the safety systems? Each option was worse than the last, but her training kicked in automatically. She began making mental notes of wind patterns, ocean currents, and nearby shipping lanes. When she returned to the ship that afternoon, Sarah made her way to different decks under the guise of taking tourist photos. What she discovered confirmed her worst fears. The ship was indeed overloaded, carrying at least 50 more passengers than its official capacity. Worse, many of the crew members she observed seemed unfamiliar with basic emergency procedures. That evening, Sarah found Elena in the ship's library, a quiet space where few passengers ventured after dinner. The young woman looked up with obvious relief when she saw Sarah approaching. "I was hoping you'd find me," Elena whispered, glancing around nervously. "I noticed something about you today. The way you observed things, the questions you didn't ask. You're not really just a tourist, are you?" Sarah made a quick decision. "What do you need me to know?" Elena's composure cracked slightly. "The ship's owner has been cutting corners everywhere. We're carrying too many passengers. Half the safety equipment is either missing or broken, and most of the crew was hired just weeks ago with minimal training. The captain knows, but he's being pressured to complete the voyage no matter what." "Why are you telling me this?" Sarah asked, though she suspected she already knew the answer. "Because yesterday I heard you talking to that elderly gentleman about emergency procedures, and you knew things that regular passengers don't know. The way you corrected him about life jacket positioning, how you noticed the emergency lighting wasn't bright enough. You have training, don't you?" Sarah remained silent, but Elena continued with growing urgency. "There's more. The weather service has been tracking a storm system that's moving faster than predicted. It's supposed to miss us, but the communications equipment is so old that we might not get updated warnings in time. If something goes wrong, Elena's voice trailed off. How long until we reach the next port? Sarah asked. 36 hours to Athens, but we're supposed to make 2 more island stops first. The owner insists we stick to the schedule because he's already sold excursions and can't afford refunds. Sarah felt the familiar weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders, the same feeling she'd experienced countless times when lives depended on her decisions. She'd tried to leave this burden behind, but it seemed to have found her anyway. Elena, she said quietly, if something happens, anything at all, you find me immediately. Do you understand? Elena nodded, tears of relief forming in her eyes. I knew you were someone who could help. I could just tell. As Sarah returned to her cabin that night, she pulled out her leather journal and began writing. Not tourist observations this time, but tactical assessments, emergency procedures, and contingency plans. The woman who had once navigated through enemy fire while coordinating the evacuation of an entire base began preparing for what might become the most important mission of her life. Outside her porthole, the Mediterranean looked deceptively peaceful under the moonlight. But Sarah could sense the change in atmospheric pressure that often preceded severe weather, and she knew that tomorrow would test everyone aboard the Mediterranean explorer in ways they never imagined. The third morning brought with it an unsettling change in the ship's rhythm. Sarah woke before dawn, her body responding to subtle shifts in the vessel's movement that most passengers wouldn't notice. The Mediterranean explorer was moving differently, fighting against swells that hadn't been there the night before. She dressed quickly and made her way to the upper deck, where she found the morning sky painted in shades of orange and deep red, a sailor's warning if ever there was one. The wind had picked up significantly, and the horizon showed the telltale dark clouds of an approaching storm system. In the ship's main dining room, the atmosphere felt forced. Crew members maintained their cheerful demeanor, but Sarah noticed the strain in their voices and the way they moved with increased urgency. Passengers seemed oblivious to the change, chatting excitedly about the day's planned stop at Mykonos. Sarah positioned herself near the ship's information desk, where she could overhear radio communications. What she heard confirmed her fears. The storm Elena had mentioned was moving much faster than predicted, and its path had shifted directly toward their route. Captain Reyes, a weathered man in his 50s, emerged from the bridge looking haggard. Sarah watched him argue quietly with a man in an expensive suit whom she recognized as Marcus Vega, the ship's owner who had joined them at Santorini. Their heated conversation was conducted in hushed tones, but Sarah caught enough words to understand the conflict. We need to change course immediately, Captain Reyes insisted. Absolutely not, Vega replied firmly. We have contractual obligations at Mykonos. The passengers have paid for this itinerary, and I won't authorize the fuel costs for a detour based on weather reports that might be wrong. Sarah felt her jaw tighten. She'd seen this type of dangerous decision-making before. Profits prioritized over safety with catastrophic results. Her instincts screamed at her to intervene, but she forced herself to remain in character. Not yet. She needed more information. Around mid-morning, the first announcement came over the ship's public address system. The captain's voice was carefully controlled as he explained that due to minor weather concerns, the stop at Mykonos would be delayed by a few hours. Passengers grumbled about the change to their plans, but most accepted the explanation without question. Sarah, however, made her way to the ship's small library where she'd arranged to meet Elena. The young woman arrived looking pale and frightened. It's worse than I thought, Elena whispered, constantly checking over her shoulder. The storm is massive and it's moving at nearly twice the predicted speed. The weather service sent an updated warning 3 hours ago, but Mr. Vega ordered the communications officer not to share it with the captain until after we dock at Mykonos. That's criminally negligent, Sarah said, struggling to keep her voice calm. There's more. I've been checking the safety equipment like you suggested. Half the life rafts have expired inspection certificates, and several of the emergency beacons aren't working. The crew roster shows we have enough people for evacuation procedures, but at least 15 of the listed crew members never actually boarded. Sarah felt the familiar coldness settle over her mind, the same focused clarity that had helped her make life or death decisions in combat situations. Elena, I need you to do something for me. Can you access the ship's passenger manifest? Yes, but why? I need to know exactly how many people are actually on board, including crew. And I need accurate information about our distance from the nearest port that could handle an emergency evacuation. Elena nodded and hurried away, leaving Sarah alone with her growing concerns. She pulled out her phone and tried to get a signal, hoping to access current weather data independently. The connection was weak, but she managed to download enough satellite imagery to confirm her worst fears. The storm system approaching them was enormous, a late-season Mediterranean cyclone with winds that could easily reach dangerous levels within hours. The ship's current position put them directly in its path, with no realistic chance of outrunning it if they maintained their current course and speed. By early afternoon, the ship's movement had become noticeably rougher. Passengers began asking questions about the weather, and Sarah overheard several concerned conversations about canceled shore excursions. The crew's responses were increasingly evasive, clearly following orders to downplay the situation. Sarah found herself studying the other passengers with new eyes. There were entire families aboard, including small children and elderly travelers who would struggle in an emergency evacuation. A group of college students celebrating a graduation cruise laughed loudly at the bar, oblivious to the danger building around them. Near the pool, an elderly couple helped each other walk slowly across the deck, both clearly dependent on mobility aids. The weight of responsibility she'd tried so hard to escape was settling firmly back on her shoulders. These people trusted that the ship's crew would keep them safe, but Sarah could see that the crew was either unable or unwilling to make the hard decisions necessary to protect everyone aboard. As the afternoon progressed, the wind continued to strengthen, and the ship began experiencing more pronounced rolling motions. The captain made another announcement, this time admitting that they would be bypassing Mykonos entirely due to deteriorating sea conditions. The disappointment among passengers was palpable, but Sarah felt a small relief that at least some reasonable decisions were being made. Elena found her again near dinner time, carrying a folder of documents she'd managed to copy without being detected. "The numbers are worse than we thought," Elena said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We have 297 passengers officially registered, but I counted at least 320 people at the safety drill, including children who weren't listed separately. The crew count shows 85, but I can only verify 71 people are actually aboard." Sarah reviewed the documents quickly, her trained mind automatically calculating evacuation scenarios and survival probabilities. The numbers painted a grim picture. If something went wrong, the ship lacked adequate resources to safely evacuate everyone. "Elena, there's something I need to tell you," Sarah said, making another crucial decision. "My name is Sarah Martinez, and I used to be a combat pilot in the Air Force. I've coordinated evacuations before, and I know how to handle emergency situations." Elena's eyes widened with a mixture of relief and hope. "I knew you weren't just a tourist. Can you help us?" "I'm going to try," Sarah replied, "but I need you to help me understand the ship's systems and emergency procedures." "And Elena? If things get bad, I'm going to need you to trust me completely, even if what I ask you to do seems impossible." As night fell and the storm continued its relentless approach, Sarah began formulating plans that she prayed she would never need to use. The woman who had once earned the nickname Storm for her ability to navigate through impossible weather conditions was about to face her greatest challenge yet, not in the cockpit of a fighter jet, but on a cruise ship filled with innocent people whose lives were increasingly in danger. The fourth day brought with it the kind of morning that experienced sailors' dread. Sarah woke to the sound of dishes crashing in nearby cabins and the unmistakable groan of a ship fighting against increasingly violent seas. The Mediterranean explorer was no longer gently rocking. It was being tossed like a toy in a bathtub. Emergency lighting flickered in the corridors, and Sarah could hear the worried voices of passengers who were beginning to realize this was no ordinary rough weather. She dressed in practical clothes and made her way carefully along the tilting hallways, using handrails to maintain her balance as the ship pitched dramatically from side to side. The main dining area was nearly empty except for a few green-faced passengers attempting to eat while fighting seasickness. Most people had retreated to their cabins, following the crew's instructions to remain in safe areas until the weather improved. But Sarah knew from her weather analysis that improvement was hours away, if it came at all. She found Elena in the guest services office, frantically trying to coordinate with different departments while fielding increasingly panicked calls from passengers. The young woman looked exhausted and overwhelmed. "Sarah, thank goodness," Elena said when she spotted her. "It's getting worse by the hour. The captain is still refusing to declare an emergency, but half the crew is seasick and we're starting to have equipment failures." "What kind of failures?" Sarah asked, her military training automatically prioritizing the most critical information. "The main communications array went down 20 minutes ago. We're operating on backup systems only. 3 of the ship's engines are running at reduced power because of fuel contamination issues, and the backup generator failed completely during the night." Sarah felt her stomach drop. Any one of these problems would be serious enough, but together they painted a picture of a ship in genuine distress. "Where's the captain now?" "On the bridge, but Mr. Vega won't let him change course or send out distress signals. He keeps insisting this is just normal Mediterranean weather, and that we'll be through it soon." Sarah made a decision that would change everything. "Elena, I need you to get me to the bridge. Tell them you're bringing up a passenger with medical training to help with seasick crew members. Can you do that?" Elena nodded, understanding immediately that this was more than just about medical assistance. The journey to the bridge felt like climbing a mountain during an earthquake. The ship's movements had become so violent that even Sarah, with her pilot's training and experience with extreme conditions, found it challenging to maintain her footing. They passed several passengers being sick in hallway bathrooms and noticed that many cabin doors had been left open as people sought air circulation. When they reached the bridge, Sarah immediately assessed the situation with the trained eye of someone who had commanded aircraft in combat conditions. Captain Reyes stood gripping the navigation console, his face gray with exhaustion and stress. 2 junior officers struggled with manual controls as electronic systems flickered unreliably. Marcus Vega stood near the back, arguing loudly into a satellite phone about insurance coverage and liability issues. The scene outside the bridge windows was terrifying. Waves that should not exist in the Mediterranean were crashing over the ship's bow, some reaching heights of 30 feet or more. The storm had intensified beyond what any weather service had predicted, and the Mediterranean explorer was taking a beating that it wasn't designed to handle. "Captain," Elena called out, "I brought someone who might be able to help." Captain Reyes looked up briefly, his eyes reflecting the desperation of a man who knew his ship was in serious trouble, but felt powerless to act. "Unless she's a marine engineer or a meteorologist, I'm not sure what help anyone can provide right now." Sarah stepped forward, dropping the tourist facade entirely. "Captain, my name is Sarah Martinez. I'm a former Air Force pilot with extensive experience in emergency evacuations and crisis management. Your ship is in immediate danger, and you need to take action now." The bridge fell silent except for the sound of wind and rain battering the windows. Vega stopped his phone conversation and stared at Sarah with suspicion and annoyance. "Who is this woman?" Vega demanded. "Captain, you can't let random passengers onto the bridge during operations." But Captain Reyes was studying Sarah's face, seeing something there that gave him hope. "What kind of experience are we talking about, Ms. Martinez?" "I've coordinated evacuations under enemy fire, managed aircraft in extreme weather conditions, and commanded rescue operations in hostile territory. Captain, this storm system is beyond what your ship can safely handle, and you know it. You need to prepare your passengers for emergency evacuation procedures immediately." "That's absolutely out of the question," Vega interrupted. "We're not declaring any emergency. The insurance implications alone would be devastating, not to mention the damage to our reputation. Captain, maintain course and speed." Sarah felt the familiar surge of controlled anger that had served her well in military command situations. She turned to face Vega directly, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to being obeyed in life-or-death situations. "Mr. Vega, your reputation won't matter if 320 people die because you were more concerned with profits than safety. This storm is generating wave heights that exceed your ship's design specifications. Your communications are failing, your engines are compromised, and your crew is too inexperienced to handle a crisis of this magnitude." As if to emphasize her point, a massive wave crashed over the bridge windows, sending spray that found its way through supposedly sealed areas. The ship rolled so severely that everyone on the bridge had to grab onto something to avoid being thrown to the floor. When the ship stabilized, Sarah continued, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Captain, I respectfully request permission to assist with emergency preparations. I've reviewed your safety equipment and passenger manifest. With proper coordination, we can get everyone off this ship safely, but only if we act now. Captain Reyes looked from Sarah to Vega, then out at the mountainous seas that surrounded them. The weight of command and the lives depending on his decisions was written clearly on his weathered face. Mr. Vega, the captain said slowly, I've been sailing these waters for 30 years and I've never seen conditions like this. We need help, and if this lady has the experience she claims, I'm willing to listen. Vega's face turned red with fury, but before he could respond, another alarm began sounding. One of the junior officers called out in panic, Captain, we're taking on water in the lower decks. The bilge pumps can't keep up. Sarah felt the familiar calm that had always settled over her during the worst crises. This was the moment she'd been training for her entire military career, even if she'd never imagined it would happen on a cruise ship in the Mediterranean. Captain, she said quietly, it's time to let me help. These people are going to die if we don't act immediately. The transformation was about to begin, from tourist to combat commander, from observer to the person responsible for saving 320 lives. Sarah Martinez was finally ready to reveal who she really was. The moment Captain Reyes nodded his agreement, Sarah Martinez transformed completely. The quiet tourist disappeared, replaced by the combat veteran who had once commanded aerial evacuations under enemy fire. Her voice carried the unmistakable authority of someone trained to lead in the worst possible circumstances. Captain, I need complete control of emergency operations, Sarah said firmly. Mr. Vega, you can maintain ownership of your ship, but right now I'm taking command of keeping everyone alive. Helena, I need you to coordinate with all department heads immediately. The ship lurched violently as another massive wave crashed over the bow, sending a cascade of water across the bridge windows. In the distance, lightning illuminated waves that towered above the ship like moving mountains. The storm had reached full fury, and the Mediterranean explorer was fighting for its life. Sarah moved to the navigation console and quickly assessed their position. We're 18 nautical miles from the nearest safe harbor, but in these conditions we'll never make it. The ship is taking on too much water and the structural stress is beyond acceptable limits. She turned to address the bridge crew with crisp efficiency. First Officer Rodriguez, I need immediate status reports on all emergency systems. Chief Engineer Thompson, how long before the water intake overwhelms your pumps? The crew responded to her command presence instinctively, recognizing competence when they saw it. Even Marcus Vega stood silent, apparently stunned by the sudden shift in authority and the obvious expertise Sarah displayed. The pumps are already at maximum capacity, Thompson reported over the radio from the engine room. We've got water coming in through stress fractures in the hull plating. At current rate of intake, we'll lose buoyancy in approximately 4 hours. Sarah absorbed this information with the same calm she'd once maintained while coordinating rescue missions in combat zones. 4 hours was actually more time than she'd expected, but it would take careful management of every resource to save everyone aboard. Elena, activate the ship's emergency communication protocols. Send out a mayday signal on all frequencies. Our position, number of souls aboard, and nature of our emergency. If Vega objects, ignore him. You can't do this. Vega finally found his voice. I'm the owner of this vessel, and I refuse to authorize— Mr. Vega, Sarah interrupted, her voice carrying the edge of steel that had once silenced arguing subordinates in military briefings. In maritime law, during a genuine emergency, command authority shifts to whoever is most qualified to preserve life. Captain Reyes has delegated that authority to me. If you interfere with life-saving operations, you'll be confined to quarters. She turned back to the ship's intercom system and began the most important announcement of her life. Attention all passengers and crew. This is Sarah Martinez speaking. I am a former military pilot now assisting with emergency operations. We are experiencing severe weather conditions that require immediate safety preparations. This is not a drill. Throughout the ship, passengers who had been hiding in their cabins or trying to ride out the storm in common areas suddenly focused with sharp attention. Sarah's voice carried a quality that made people listen, the unmistakable tone of someone who knew exactly what they were doing in a crisis. All passengers should immediately put on life jackets and report to your assigned muster stations. Crew members will assist you. Remain calm, follow instructions precisely, and help others who need assistance. We have time to do this safely if everyone cooperates. The response was immediate. Passengers who had been paralyzed by fear began moving with purpose. Crew members, many of whom had been overwhelmed by the situation, suddenly had clear direction to follow. Sarah's authoritative presence gave everyone something they desperately needed: competent leadership. But Sarah knew the announcement was only the beginning. The real challenge would be coordinating an evacuation in conditions that would test even the most experienced emergency responders. "Captain, I need to inspect the lifeboat systems personally," she said. "Based on my earlier observations, we have serious problems with capacity and functionality." As they made their way to the boat deck, fighting against wind that now exceeded 70 miles per hour, Sarah's worst fears were confirmed. Several lifeboats were damaged by the extreme weather, and others were positioned in locations that would make launching them nearly impossible in current conditions. "We have 8 functional lifeboats with capacity for 40 people each," Sarah calculated quickly. "That's 320 people maximum, but we have at least 320 souls aboard, possibly more. We need alternative solutions." She studied the ship's layout with tactical precision, identifying every possible flotation device, emergency shelter, and potential rescue resource. Her military experience in improvised evacuations was about to become crucial. "Elena, I need you to organize passengers into groups based on physical capability," Sarah instructed. "Strongest swimmers in the last boats, families with children, and elderly passengers in the first boats. Anyone with medical training should be distributed evenly across all boats." The ship rolled again, this time staying tilted at a dangerous angle for nearly 30 seconds before slowly righting itself. Water cascaded across the deck, and Sarah could see that several passengers were struggling to maintain their footing at the muster stations. "Time is running shorter than I hoped," she said to Captain Reyes. "The ship's stability is compromising faster than expected. We need to begin launching lifeboats within the next 2 hours, whether the storm subsides or not." From her position on the boat deck, Sarah could see the organized chaos she had set in motion. Crew members who had seemed lost and confused now moved with purpose, following the clear procedures she had established. Passengers helped each other with life jackets and supported those who were struggling with seasickness or fear. But the storm was not finished with them. Weather reports crackling through the emergency radio indicated that the worst of the system was still approaching. Sarah realized that saving everyone would require not just good planning, but also perfect timing and perhaps more luck than anyone had a right to expect. "Captain," she said quietly, "I need to tell you something. The evacuation I'm planning, it's going to require splitting people across multiple rescue scenarios. Some will go in lifeboats, others will need to wait for Coast Guard helicopters, and some may need to use emergency flotation devices. It's not ideal, but it's the only way to save everyone." Captain Reyes nodded grimly. "What do you need from me?" "Trust," Sarah replied simply, "and the authority to make decisions that might seem impossible. We're about to ask ordinary people to do extraordinary things, and they're only going to do it if they believe we know what we're talking about." As if summoned by her words, Elena appeared at her side with an update that would change everything. "Sarah, I just received a radio message from the Greek Coast Guard. They have helicopters standing by, but the storm conditions mean they can't reach us for at least 6 hours. We're on our own until then." Sarah looked out at the mountainous seas and felt the familiar surge of determination that had carried her through every impossible mission. The real test was about to begin. 6 hours felt like an eternity when 320 lives hung in the balance. Sarah stood on the bridge, coordinating multiple emergency operations simultaneously while the Mediterranean explorer fought against waves that seemed determined to claim the ship. Her mind processed dozens of variables at once: wind speed, wave height, structural integrity, passenger locations, crew capabilities, and rescue timing. "Elena, status report on passenger organization," Sarah called out over the howling wind. "All passengers accounted for and divided into evacuation groups as you requested," Elena replied, her voice steady, despite the chaos around them. "Group 1 has 85 people, families with small children and passengers needing medical assistance. Group 2 has 90 people, elderly passengers and those with mobility issues. Groups 3 and 4 have the remaining passengers organized by physical capability." Sarah nodded approvingly. The military precision of her planning was keeping panic at bay and ensuring that when evacuation began, it would proceed in orderly fashion. But the ship's condition was deteriorating faster than she'd hoped. "Captain, how's our stability?" she asked. "We're listing 7 degrees to starboard and taking on water faster than the pumps can handle," Captain Reyes reported grimly. "Chief Thompson estimates we have maybe 4 hours before we lose positive buoyancy. 4 hours to evacuate 320 people in conditions that would challenge even the most experienced rescue teams." Sarah felt the familiar cold calculation settle over her mind, the same mental state that had helped her coordinate the evacuation of an entire military base under enemy fire 3 years ago. "We're not waiting for perfect conditions," Sarah announced to the bridge crew. "We start evacuation operations now, beginning with the most vulnerable passengers." The decision meant launching lifeboats in seas that exceeded all safety recommendations, but Sarah had calculated that waiting longer would be even more dangerous. The ship's structural integrity was failing, and delay could mean total disaster. "All crew to evacuation stations," she called over the ship's intercom. "Group 1 passengers report to lifeboat stations 1 and 2 immediately. This is not a drill. Move with purpose, but do not run. Help those who need assistance." The response throughout the ship was immediate and organized. Sarah's authoritative leadership had given passengers and crew alike the confidence to act decisively, even in terrifying conditions. Families gathered their children, crew members helped elderly passengers navigate the tilting corridors, and everyone moved with the focused determination that comes from knowing exactly what needs to be done. At Lifeboat Station 1, Sarah personally oversaw the loading of the first evacuation boat. The process that should have taken minutes stretched to nearly an hour, as crew members fought against the ship's violent movements to safely secure passengers. Children cried in their parents' arms, but the adults maintained remarkable composure under Sarah's steady guidance. "Remember," she told each group as they prepared to launch, "stay together once you're in the water. The Coast Guard knows your position and will reach you within hours. You have emergency supplies, signaling devices, and trained crew members with you. You will be rescued." The first lifeboat launched into seas that would have been unthinkable under normal circumstances. Sarah watched through binoculars as the small craft disappeared and reappeared among waves the size of buildings. But the boat's crew managed to maintain control and begin moving away from the ship toward calmer waters. "1 down. 7 to go," Elena said quietly, appearing at Sarah's side with an update. "How are the passengers holding up?" Sarah asked. "Better than expected. Your announcements and the organized evacuation plan have kept panic to a minimum. People are scared, but they trust you. They're following instructions even when those instructions seem impossible." The second lifeboat proved more challenging. A mechanical failure with the launch mechanism meant that crew members had to manually lower the boat using emergency procedures that most of them had never practiced in real conditions. Sarah found herself directing the operation personally, calling out commands based on her experience with aircraft carrier deck operations. "Steady on the aft line," she shouted over the wind. "Lower away on my mark." 3, 2, 1 mark. The boat hit the water hard but intact, with 40 more passengers safely away from the failing ship. Sarah felt a moment of satisfaction, but she knew the most difficult evacuations were still ahead. Groups 3 and 4 contained the strongest passengers, but they would also be launching into the worst conditions as the storm continued to intensify. By the time the 4th lifeboat was ready for launch, the ship was listing 15 degrees, and waves were regularly washing across the boat deck. "Sarah," Captain Reyes called urgently, "I'm getting reports of structural failure in the forward sections. We may not have as much time as we thought." Sarah made a command decision that would have been unthinkable to anyone without her military background. "Captain, prepare to launch 2 boats simultaneously. I know it's against protocol, but we're running out of options." The dual launch was a controlled chaos that required split-second timing and perfect coordination between multiple crew teams. Sarah positioned herself where she could oversee both operations, calling out instructions and adjustments as the boats were prepared and lowered. The maneuver succeeded, but barely. Both boats hit the water within seconds of each other and immediately began fighting to avoid collision in the mountainous seas. Sarah watched with held breath until both craft had separated safely and begun their journey away from the ship. 4 boats away, 160 people evacuated, Elena reported. "But Sarah, we're getting reports that Lifeboat 5 has damage to its hull plating. It may not be seaworthy." Sarah quickly calculated their remaining options. "How many people in groups 3 and 4? 80 each, 160 total. And we have 4 remaining boats, but one is potentially unsafe." Sarah felt the weight of impossible decisions pressing down on her. Elena, I need you to organize the remaining passengers. Into groups of 35, we're going to overload the functional boats slightly, rather than risk lives in a damaged craft. It was a calculated risk that violated every safety protocol, but Sarah's experience told her it was the right choice. Better to have slightly overcrowded but seaworthy boats than to lose lives to preventable disasters. As the fifth boat prepared for launch with its increased passenger load, Sarah received the radio call she'd been hoping for. Mediterranean Explorer, this is Hellenic Coast Guard Rescue Coordination. We have helicopters en route to your position. Estimated arrival in 90 minutes. Can you maintain current position? Sarah looked around at the failing ship, the continuing storm, and the remaining passengers who still needed evacuation. 90 minutes felt like an eternity, but it also represented hope. Coast Guard, this is Emergency Coordinator Martinez aboard Mediterranean Explorer. We have successfully evacuated 200 passengers in lifeboats and have 120 remaining aboard. Ship is taking on water and listing severely, but we can maintain position for helicopter evacuation. The response was immediate and professional. Roger that, Martinez. Maintain current evacuation procedures. Our helicopters are equipped for severe weather rescue operations. You're doing excellent work. As the fifth lifeboat disappeared into the storm, Sarah allowed herself one moment of satisfaction. Against impossible odds, with inadequate equipment and in conditions that exceeded all safety parameters, her evacuation plan was working. But the hardest part was still ahead, keeping the remaining passengers and crew safe until rescue helicopters could reach them. The ship groaned ominously as another massive wave crashed over the bow, and Sarah realized that the next 90 minutes would test every skill she'd learned in her military career. The final 90 minutes tested every skill Sarah had acquired during her military career. With 200 passengers safely away in lifeboats and rescue helicopters approaching through the storm, she faced the most challenging phase of the evacuation, keeping the remaining 120 people alive while the Mediterranean Explorer slowly lost its battle against the sea. The ship's list had increased to 20 degrees, making movement extremely difficult and dangerous. Water cascaded through damaged sections of the superstructure with each wave impact, and the groaning of stressed metal filled the air with ominous warnings of structural failure. All remaining passengers to the helicopter evacuation area on Deck 12, Sarah announced over the ship's intercom, her voice carrying the same steady authority that had guided them through the crisis. Move carefully, use handholds at all times, and help others who need assistance. Coast Guard helicopters will begin rescue operations shortly. The journey to Deck 12 became an expedition in itself. Passengers and crew formed human chains to help each other navigate corridors that tilted like funhouse passages. Sarah personally assisted an elderly man who was struggling with the ship's movement, while crew members carried a pregnant woman who had been injured during the earlier evacuations. Elena appeared at Sarah's side, soaked from spray but still coordinating communications with remarkable efficiency. Sarah, the helicopters are reporting severe downdrafts from the storm. They may need to abort the first approach. Sarah felt her stomach tighten, but her voice remained calm. How long for conditions to improve enough for rescue operations? Unknown. The storm system is larger than predicted and wind speeds are still increasing. This was the scenario Sarah had feared most, trapped between a failing ship and weather conditions that prevented rescue. She quickly assessed their remaining options, her mind working through contingencies with the same precision she'd once used to coordinate combat missions. Elena, gather all remaining crew members. We need to prepare the ship's emergency shelters and redistribute weight to maintain stability as long as possible. The next hour became a masterclass in crisis management. Sarah organized the remaining passengers into groups based on the ship's safest areas, balancing the need to keep people together with the engineering requirements of maintaining the vessel's stability. She coordinated with Captain Reyes to shut down non-essential systems and redirect power to critical life support and communication equipment. Most importantly, she maintained the morale and organization that had kept panic at bay throughout the crisis. Passengers who should have been terrified instead helped each other with quiet determination, following Sarah's instructions with the trust that comes from witnessing competent leadership under pressure. Contact from Coast Guard helicopters, the radio crackled. We're beginning rescue approach. Conditions are marginal, but we can extract passengers in groups of 6. Prepare for helicopter operations. Sarah felt a surge of relief mixed with new urgency. Helicopter evacuations in severe weather required split-second timing and perfect coordination between aircraft crews and ship personnel. One mistake could be catastrophic for everyone involved. "All passengers prepare for helicopter evacuation," she announced. "When your name is called, move quickly but safely to the evacuation point. Follow crew instructions exactly. The helicopters are risking their lives to save us. We need to make their job as easy as possible." The first helicopter appeared through the storm like a mechanical angel, its crew fighting extreme wind conditions to maintain position above the ship's tilting deck. Sarah coordinated the ground operations personally, using hand signals and radio communication to guide the aircraft into position for the first extraction. 6 passengers were lifted away into the storm, a family with 2 small children and an elderly couple who had been struggling with the ship's movement. Sarah watched the helicopter disappear into the gray chaos of wind and rain, knowing that each successful extraction brought them closer to complete rescue. But the ship was running out of time. The list had increased to nearly 30 degrees, and Captain Reyes reported that water was reaching critical systems throughout the vessel. The Mediterranean Explorer was entering its final phase of survival. "How many more helicopter trips?" Sarah asked Elena as the second aircraft approached for another extraction. "At 6 people per trip with 20-minute intervals between helicopters, we need at least 10 more extractions for remaining passengers and crew." Sarah did the calculation instantly. 3 hours minimum, probably longer given the deteriorating weather conditions. The ship might not survive that long. "Change of plans," she announced to the bridge crew. "We're going to prepare emergency flotation devices for anyone who can't wait for helicopter extraction. Better to have options than to wait for disaster." The decision proved prescient. As the 4th helicopter completed its extraction, Chief Thompson's voice crackled over the radio with news that changed everything. "Bridge, this is engineering. We've lost primary bilge pumps and the backup systems are failing. I estimate 30 minutes before we lose critical buoyancy." 30 minutes for helicopter evacuation of 90 remaining people was impossible. Sarah faced the decision that had been building throughout. The crisis, the moment when leadership meant choosing between bad options and worse options, all remaining passengers and non-essential crew to emergency flotation stations. She announced with the same calm authority she'd maintained throughout the crisis. "Coast Guard helicopters will continue extractions, but we're preparing alternative rescue methods as backup." The final phase of the evacuation became a carefully orchestrated ballet of multiple rescue operations. Helicopters continued extracting passengers from the ship's deck, while crew members prepared emergency flotation devices for those who might need to enter the water. Sarah coordinated both operations simultaneously, her military training allowing her to manage complex logistics under extreme pressure. With 15 minutes remaining before the ship reached critical condition, the last helicopter lifted away carrying Captain Reyes and 5 crew members. Sarah found herself among the final group of 12 people still aboard the Mediterranean Explorer. Herself, Elena, 5 crew members essential for final operations, and 5 passengers who had volunteered to wait until the end. "Sarah," Elena said quietly, "the last helicopter is approaching for us." Sarah looked around at the ship that had been her battlefield for the past day. The Mediterranean Explorer was dying, but it had served its final purpose. Every single person aboard had been evacuated alive. No lives had been lost despite impossible conditions and equipment failures that should have resulted in catastrophe. As the final helicopter lifted Sarah and the last survivors away from the sinking ship, she watched the Mediterranean Explorer disappear beneath the waves. The vessel that had carried 320 people into danger had ultimately played a role in their salvation, providing a stable platform long enough for complete evacuation. "Mediterranean Explorer evacuation complete," Sarah reported over the radio to Coast Guard headquarters. "All 320 souls accounted for and rescued. No casualties." The response came immediately, filled with professional admiration. "Outstanding work, Martinez. Your coordination saved lives today." As the helicopter carried her toward safety, Sarah reflected on the past day. She had tried to leave her military identity behind, to become just another tourist seeking peace and anonymation. Instead, she had rediscovered that some callings never truly leave you. When people needed leadership in the worst possible circumstances, the skills and instincts of Captain Sarah Storm Martinez had emerged exactly when they were needed most. The woman who had boarded the Mediterranean explorer as a quiet tourist had revealed herself to be exactly what 320 people needed to survive an impossible situation. Her past as a combat pilot hadn't been something to escape from. It had been preparation for the most important mission of her life.